wonderful news to have. Thank you all for coming. Lots of good news here. John just turned the thermostat down a little bit because obviously when it gets this crowded, it gets a little warm. So the cool air is coming. Also coming this Saturday is the ice cream social, 12 to 4. It'll be the usual ice cream and homemade pastries. Is there?
We were talking about the air coming up. I was going to put my purse over it for her.
I think you're sitting near a vent, aren't you?
Yes.
Are you okay with that? Yes. You're okay. Okay. Good.
Someone will trade with you in there.
Yeah. We can have everybody stand up. No, the ice cream social is Saturday. Keep your fingers crossed for the weather. Come and enjoy the community band. Will be here. So I know we need to move along. Ron's going to handle things from now on.
Thank you, Bonnie. Just a couple quick things. We will be kicking off our annual raffle. This year we'll have a Colt Python handgun and a $1,000 Walmart card. So tickets will only be $20. You'll know more about that on Saturday at the Ice Cream Social. Our next Thursday evening program is August 10th. We'll have a roundtable discussion about the history of the Wyandot County Libraries. So instead of spending a lot of time talking, I know we've got a big crowd and I'm surprised, and thank you all for being here. The last two times we've had, we've had a packed house, so maybe Bonnie and I hit on something by limiting the numbers, but this is a great program that we have tonight. We are honored to have with us Mr. John McConnell, who is a grandson of Fowler and Lucille, who donated the home to the Historical Society. So we owe a great big debt of thank you and gratitude to the McConnell family for their generosity and the continued relationship that we've maintained over the last 20 years or so, and especially the last 8 or 9 years with John and I and the family since I've been here. So thank you for all that. But tonight we're going to share a little bit about the history of the Beery family, the McConnell family, as well as the home that became a museum. And so I will be assisting John. It seems like Bonnie has me involved in every single Thursday program, so I can't get away from it if I want to.
I'm listening, Ron.
No, don't worry, she's already got me scheduled for one that's not on the schedule. So we'll start, with I've got a slideshow that I have some images that I put together for a program I did a couple weeks ago over at Vancrest, and then John has some items that he's brought out with the family. So I will turn the microphone over to him, let him do a little more introduction about him and his family, and then we'll get on, because I know it's kind of crowded and packed, and you're going to get uncomfortable after the 2 hours when we finish.
No, I won't bore you that much.
Thank you all for being here. John, thank you especially.
Welcome, Ron. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
There, okay. In there?
Yes.
Okay. I'll do my best not to bore you to tears. I'm not a real public speaker, but this is very interesting to me. This house and my family, pretty special history that we have going through basically from the beginning of this country. And a lot of it's here in Upper Sandusky. Do we have board members here? Raise your hands. Thank you. Thank you for all of you for doing, volunteering. And you really need to give Ron applause.
Yeah.
Ron is the glue of and he's done a fantastic job. I first came here back in the mid-'80s. I was a big drag racer. I was racing in Columbus at National Trail. And on my way home to Chicago, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to stop in Upper and see the house. Well, of course, it was the middle of the week and it was closed. And I went somewhere in town and I found somebody. I told him who I was, and within 10 minutes, this gentleman who was an EMT came, and he was the director at the time, and his name escapes me. Does anybody remember him? No? Okay. Well, he proceeded to show me through the house, and he was just really gung-ho. We went from the attic to the basement. It was great. So about a year later, he calls me up one day and says, "You got any stuff from the house, any pictures and stuff?" I said, "Yeah, I don't know. We'll look around." Well, it turns out we have a ton of stuff. I mean, a lot. And my Aunt Marilyn, who is 98 now, she knows more about this house than anybody. She spent a lot of time here in the 30s and the 40s, in summers. We came here in '92 with the whole family, about 13 of us. And the town had a big dinner for us, and we brought tons of pictures and all kinds of stuff here. Is anybody here remember that? Oh boy. Okay, well, that was the beginning of the interest in this place. And as time went on, my aunts and uncle started passing, and people were moving, and there was all these boxes. Oh, that's from Ohio. What are you going to do with it? Well, I was going to throw it out. Well, I'll take it. Let me take it. So I kept getting these boxes, and they sat in attics for decades and decades. So about 7, 8 years ago, I started looking through them, and what I found in some of these boxes is truly amazing. Can I walk over there with this? One of the items I found was this. And I didn't think anything of it. I couldn't read the script on here. Turns out this fell off a pallbearer of Lincoln's funeral procession going through the Columbus building, one of the few places where they took the casket off. And it fell off, and the note says, Governor Breaux, who was married to a McConnell, hands to Mrs. McConnell. So it was just sitting in a box for decades and decades. So you guys are welcome to come up and look at it when the show is over. And we have all kinds of stuff, mostly pertaining to the Upper Sandusky area and the house and the family. Thank God to Leafy for saving all this stuff. She saved everything. So another story I have is when I was growing up, we had a lot of old furniture in the house. My mom always just said, "Oh, that's from Ohio." Oh, okay, no big deal. Well, years go by, and I'm married, and my wife says one day, "What's so great about furniture made in Ohio?" And I'm like, no. That furniture was in the house, the family house in Upper Sandusky, Ohio. The story is, when my grandfather donated the house in 1960, when he passed away, his wife, my grandmother, being as frugal as she is, or was, I'm sorry, she came down here with all my aunts and uncles and trailers and cars and took tons of furniture and items from this house back to Illinois and Wisconsin. And we all grew up with Ohio furniture. I grew up in a bed, I slept in a bed from Ohio. I still have a dresser in my room was from here. So over the years, we've started kind of bringing stuff back. Probably the biggest piece is right here. That was sitting in my grandmother's basement for decades, deteriorating. And my uncle had it refurbished and had it shipped here. He was going to give it away. I said, "No, that needs to go back to the house." And that really ugly clock right there, that I grew up with. That was in our home, on our mantle. Tons of pictures of me and my brother growing up with that in the background. And So I was here, I don't know, a few years ago, and I saw a picture of that clock from the 1890s with my relatives standing in front of it. So that had to come back. So that's kind of what the story is with me and with the connection here. I guess I'll let Ron talk a little about it.
Nice.
And I got more stuff to show everybody.
Thank you. So I'm going to give kind of just some background information on the family and the house, and John is going to jump in every once in a while with some anecdotes and other things. But, so, as I said, I did this program just a few days ago, and a lot of this information images came from the work over the winter that Sarah and I did putting together that new 3-panel exhibit on the history of the family, the house, and the Historical Society. So that was a big collaborative effort between the board and the curators to get that front hallway restored. And Sarah and I sat down and brainstormed the way that it would look, and then we started going through and pulling out pictures. And luckily we had a lot of images from the family that they'd given us. But it starts out, the connection to this house. Everybody refers to this as one of the houses that was built by George Beery. George Beery was the patriarch of the family. He was born in 1783 in Virginia, and then he married Catherine Cradleball in 1811. What's kind of interesting is in their marriage license, she's listed as Kitty. So, very informal, but the story was that the family lived, were moving here. The Wyandot Indians were moved out in 1843, so we have some reference that maybe as early as 1845, Isaac Beery was here. Well, Sarah and I, when we were inventorying, found a little wallet that was dated 1845 with Isaac Beery's name inside. So we do know that he came and settled here with his twin brother Anthony in 1850, and they started a dry goods store. So George Beery reportedly had these 3 houses built for his sons. The one that we're in right now was built for Isaac. This one over on 8th and I believe Walker was built for his son Anthony. And then the other one at the far end, just across from St. Peter's School, was built for George. And George Jr. apparently took it upon himself to build houses for his daughter and son right next door or across the street. So most of the houses over on 8th Street in that block are all Beery homes. Now whether he didn't trust his son-in-laws or why, but he had the house on either side built for his daughters so the family could stay together. Reportedly this house, when the property was purchased, was one entire city block. Today we just have 1/4 of a block. And they used 110,000 bricks that were fired here on site to build this house. So, this was a letter that George Beery Jr. wrote, and it's all about the family history of his father, George Beery, and previous generations. And this was part of the materials that the McConnells brought back during one of their visits and left. It's actually, you can't really see it up here, but it's got Isaac's signature from 1879 on it. This was in his possession. George and Catherine had 12 children. So Isaac was one of their boys, and he settled here, as I said, in 1850. We have the family Bible, and we did not know that we had the family Bible until we were inventorying, and it just has a single little page in it with the listing of the births for Isaac and Leafy and their 4 children. I don't know the story behind the name Leafy, the origin of it, but we know that it goes back to Leafy Stevens. She married Dr. Stephen Fowler, and then they had their daughter, Leafy Fowler, and then she was the mother Leafy, and then they had their daughter Leafy Angie Beery. So there were 3 generations of the name Leafy. So it must have been confusing because I saw a lot of stuff that, and their daughter was, they referred to her as sometimes as Angie, probably to differentiate between her mother and her grandmother. So this is a funeral card for Leafy Fowler. That would have been her mother, the Leafy Stevens. She died in the 1890s. Her husband, Dr. Fowler, died in 1847. So Isaac and Leafy had 4 children. I always get the names. Stephen Fowler Beery, Leafy Angie Beery, Isaac Foster Beery, and Minnie Beery. So some of you that can see on the side up there above the piano is a picture of Leafy Angie Beery. She was born in a house in 1855. So Isaac and Leafy were married in September of 1852. This property was purchased in December of 1852, and we think the initial portion of the house that we're sitting in right now was built about 1853. And then they had 4 children in the mid to late 1850s, so we think the addition was put on maybe in the 1860s to give them more space. So this is copies of the marriage license. What I found interesting was the one of them that even though they were married in 1852, the marriage license wasn't officially filed until like 1896. So why it took so long? There were two different listings in the Wyandot County marriage books. The one that where the pastor sent in that yes, I married them, and then the official one, a separate one that even though it was September of '56, you see up here the date of July. It's like, so I don't know if somebody was rewriting the books and wrote a wrong date down, but I just found it really interesting. You can see Isaac H. And do you know what the H stands for? I've never seen it in any.
I do not know.
Everything he signed was Isaac H. or IH, but I've never seen anywhere where he actually says what the H is for.
Maybe Henry?
This is a picture from the Sanborn fire map from about 1892 showing the layout of the house. So here is the original 3-story portion that was built in the 1850s. This is what I think was the 1860s addition, and there's a little kitchen area in the 1880s, and then these were little outbuildings, workrooms. This would have been the original summer kitchen. In the 1940s, they filled this in when they were renting the house out. There were other buildings on the property which we don't know the location, such as the well. We have an outhouse back here, but we don't know if that's the original one that was on the property. Across the alley is a brown garage from the neighbor's house. That apparently was where Robert and Leafy kept their horses. Even though they lived in the 1920s and 30s, neither one drove a car. So every time they went somewhere, they got the horse and buggy out. So they just kept adding on until eventually this was all connected, by the early 1900s. What's nice is on the Sanborn map, it's all color-coded. So the yellow is wood frame, and the pink would have been brick. So these are some early images. Again, things that were provided by the family. They're copies of copies, so not necessarily the highest quality. But you can see in the parlor, you're kind of looking at this doorway back here. So to kind of orient you, some of the furnishings, looks like they had some kind of drapery over the doorway. The chandeliers up here with the globes are the original gas chandeliers that we still have today that were converted to electric. And this little globe chandelier piece on top looks very similar to the one up above in the back. And wallpaper in here. This little picture up here of a girl playing a piano, we have one hanging up in the McConnell bedroom upstairs. And I believe that may be the same picture that was shown here. But yeah, just very busy, really packed room. But as you look around, this room has the original floors, the original pier mirror, the chandeliers, and then we have a lot of furnishings in here as well, which I'll point out. This would have been the dining room. So when this house was built, this would have been 2 rooms, and that front portion would have been the parlor. This would have been a dining room with some kind of pocket doors or French doors in between. And then over in the corner where the little bump out is, that was the original fireplace. So when they took out that in the 1880s and put in the boiler with the forced air heat, we think that's when they made the little bump out, and they transferred that archway into here to make this one large room, because the next room was used as the dining room. That was the formal dining room for dinner parties, and people could pull up in their buggy alongside of the house with the carriage stone and come straight into the parlor. And the reason I know a lot of this is thanks to his Aunt Marilyn. When she was here, you know, a few years ago, we walked through the house and she's like, oh, this was here, and this was here, and this was this person's bedroom. This is where Leafy sat and listened to her radio. So I was trying to process all of this information in my head, because it's like, I hope I have that great a memory when I get there, because even though she hadn't been here for 50, 60 years, she could just visualize how the place was laid out, and she was a great source of. So this picture of the dining room, I think, was in the next room. It's kind of hard to tell with the pictures are a little dark, kind of hard to see exactly, but it's really great to see, you know, the images, so you can see the carpeting on the floor underneath. So the Isaac and Leafy lived here. Isaac died in 1884, and then his wife died, you know, several years later. They were living here. Their daughter Leafy, seen here in this cabinet card, lived with her parents, and in 1891 she married Dr. Robert McConnell. He was a little bit older than she was, and he was a Civil War veteran. He has kind of an interesting story. He enlisted in 1862 when he was 19, and he.
Let me show him the picture real quick.
Okay. Yeah.
This is. I know it's gonna be hard for all of you to see this, but
John, I'll surprise you.
Oh, he has it. There you
It's-
go.
oh, you got it.
It's a bad copy of a copy.
There's the original.
So, but, so this I found in some of the images that came from in a folder upstairs in our archives that came from the 90s. These are really bad. They're scans of photocopies of what I'm guessing was the originals that somebody made. But so this is Dr. Robert McConnell. He was 19. He enlisted as a private with Company F of the 123rd Regiment that was raised here in Upper Sandusky. During the Battle of Winchester, Virginia, in June 15, 1863, the entire regiment, except for one company, was captured. And he was sent to Belle Isle prison camp near Richmond, Virginia, near the infamous Libby prison camp. Well, the story was that he was there in the camp. Somehow they learned that he had some medical training. So they managed to get him exchanged, and the government in their wisdom, they discharged him as a private from the 123rd, and they brought him in as the assistant surgeon of the 101st. So he spent the rest of his time as assistant surgeon, and then after the war, he attended a lot of medical courses throughout the United States. He even spent a year in Austria learning medicine.
I got one thing to say about him. I found a letter few years ago that he wrote during the war, and he said he was a coward. He said he hid behind trees as bullets whizzed around his head.
Well,
That's what he said. He was very truthful.
yeah, I'm
That's
not
probably
sure,
why he's still here. He was
yeah,
still
I'm not
alive.
sure if that was being a coward or being
Right.
protective, proactive, so they could survive the war. So what's interesting is, this is a picture of him enlisting in the service in 1862. According to the notes with the images, this is supposedly Leafy and Minnie about 1862. So that kind of gives you an idea of the age difference.
Yeah.
So, but they were married in 1894 or 1891. They had two sons, Robert Nelson McConnell Jr., who was born about 1893, and then the one we're familiar with, Fowler Beery McConnell, who was born in 1894. I'll go back. So there's a picture of him after he's traveled all around. He eventually married, and he settled in Upper Sandusky. And looking at the old indexes, the old city directories, he wasn't just a physician and a doctor. He was a real estate investor. He was a stock investor. We have a lot of stock certificates, and he had dealt a lot in real estate. So I don't know if people paid him in property, or if if they couldn't pay, he took property. But there's a lot of references. There's a couple areas of McConnell Street and McConnell development that we think are tied to his real estate dealings. He was an early investor in things like the Ohio Thresher Company, the Central Ohio Buggy Company, the Wyandot Gas and Electric Company. And we know this because thanks to Leafy, we have all of these certificates that were never thrown away. We just have piles and piles of these documents. And some of the things that were given to us before John even got involved. I think my previous predecessors had a lot of stuff that they didn't really know what to do with, so a lot of it was just filed away. So going through all of this information to put the exhibit together was a lot of fun, gave me a lot of information about the family. So here is the marriage license for Robert McConnell and Miss Leafy Beery. So this was actually filed, just a couple of days after their marriage, so it actually went in the books at the proper time. And a lot of this was, I just found a lot of this stuff online. Curtis Beery Jr., somehow, he was a probate judge, and there's some connection between him and the Beery family. He's a distant cousin, I believe. These are pictures of Robert and Fowler that I found on the University of Chicago website. And I did not know that the family actually has the originals. John was telling me. But there's Robert and then Fowler that we're familiar with. They both graduated from Upper Sandusky, went to the University of Chicago after, and they both played baseball and football under Amos Alonzo Stagg. Some of you may recognize that name as one of the preeminent football coaches, but he also, taught other sports, track and field, baseball and stuff at the university. So they were prominent on the team. Here are some other things from Dr. McConnell, some of his advertisements, one from the 1860s, one from 1908, and then one of these various medical college cards where there was basically a ticket to go to an anatomy class or some sort of medical procedure class. And so we have a lot of those from the family. I don't know why, but at some point in about 1916, while they were at university, Robert and Fowler found them along with about 35 of their classmates and a couple professors enlisting in the Illinois National Guard. And they went down to the Mexican border to help with border security during the Pancho Villa raids. And this was in late fall of 1916. The story was that Fowler wanted to become a lawyer. So when he got back from the maneuvers in November, he learned that the law school had started in September. So instead of waiting another year to start, he started his 44-year career with Sears and Roebuck. And I'm sure John has a lot of stories about that.
I got one thing to say. Before he started with Sears, he was deployed to Europe, and he was in Paris the night the war ended. He was trained as a machine gun captain, and he was about to be deployed the next morning. So he was always at the right place at the right time.
Yeah. So they both, as I said, they both served. While Fowler was overseas with his machine gun company, Robert was actually assigned to training units here in the States. Unfortunately, there was an accident, and Robert was killed in his early 20s. And so, Fowler then, was the sole heir. When his mother passed away in 1937, he inherited his home. But at the time, he was working for Sears and Roebuck. So, a little bit of the story was that in reading some of it, that he started out as a shoe salesman. It was just, when he got back, he didn't have time to go to school, so one of the neighbors said, well, come work for me for a little bit, and then you can go to school after. Now, 44 years later, when he retired from Sears, he still hadn't gone back to get his law degree. But so he started as a shoe salesman. He was so good that he kept moving up so quickly. At one point, he was put in charge of the Kansas City mail order room. Got that so successful, they moved him to the head of the Philadelphia mail order department. And then from there, they made him the Southeast Regional Manager for Sears and Roebuck. This basically meant he was in charge of every Sears from Tennessee down to Florida, from the Atlantic over to Texas. After a few years, the Sears decided to disband all of these regional managers, so they put them on the board of directors. This was right around the time that he inherited this home, so he did not live here. His mother had been living here, as well as his Aunt Minnie Powell and his cousin John Powell, that some of you may know or heard of. So he lived with his family in the Chicago area and rented the home out. In 1946, Fowler was named the president of Sears and Roebuck. So he led them through the post-war years. In 1958, he was named the chairman of the board, the CEO of Sears and Roebuck, and finally retired in 1960. So these are some pictures of the house where about the time that he would have been living here growing up. And a couple things that you'll notice, this is the parlor that we're in. Here is the bunk that I mentioned earlier. This little marble top table in the corner is actually the one over there that the clock is on top of that John mentioned earlier. And here you can see that the change in, instead of the globes, we have more like candles up in there. Again, different types of wallpaper in here. So it's a really great vision of how the house is decorated. There is the picture, a couple of pictures that were mentioned earlier of the clock being on the mantle, and they're like, I've seen that clock there before. And I was told that it was made about 1855, so it's almost as old as the house. And it was modeled after a clock down in New Orleans. I would love to find this little table because I don't know if that's a leaf that folds down or how this. But this is the little fireplace inside the dining room in the next room. Right around the corner sat this piece, the big sideboard that we were mentioning earlier. And it sat in there right beside where the little bench was. And this was a picture that Fowler saw, and he said, I still have that. If you want it, I'll give it to you. And we're like, really? No. We thought, he was just kind of joking. He said, no, it's traveled. I had it with me in Florida, Wisconsin, Illinois. It's originally, from Dr. McConnell in Ohio. So this was, I think they were out, October of 2017, I think it was.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So, about,
It's been that long.
yeah, surprising. We all lost about 3 years with COVID, so nothing's quite as, seems shorter than it is. But so, to move forward, December, I'm sitting here working. All of a sudden, the Old Dominion semi freight truck pulls up, the lift gate opens, drops down, this big crate is sitting there, and the gentleman comes up to the door and goes, sign the paper, it's yours. And I'm like, I have no idea. He didn't let me know it was coming. He just said he was sitting it. So I got a couple of the board members. We took the crate apart, and this piece was down in it. It basically is 3 pieces, the base, the back, and the little box. So we took it out, got it all together, and it was kind of a funny thing, but you had about 4 grown guys here, spent 4 hours trying to figure out how this little box opens, until one of the board members was like, you know what, I think it's just a decorative box. So we're like, no, there's gotta be a secret compartment. How does the top open and the drawers pull out? And it's basically just a big fancy box. But this was a sideboard that was made in 1875 from the family, so we're honored to have it back. When the family left, as John said, they took a lot of stuff with them. There were certain things that were just too big and bulky, like the 1903 Curl French piano right here in the front. That was left in the house for us. So what's nice is every year during a Christmas open house, we have it tuned up so we have the students and musicians play live music in the McConnell house on the original piano. So we get up to Fowler and Lucille, who were the ones that donated the house. This was the one that I had some of the most difficulty, because I knew a lot about Lucille, but I had no images of her. I couldn't find out a whole lot. There wasn't much online, like an obituary or anything. So I contacted the family while I was working on the exhibit and said, do you have any pictures? And they're like, well, let me get a hold of my cousin. Well, let me get a hold of my cousin. Let me talk to my aunt. And eventually, they were like, well, we have some pictures of them from Marilyn's wedding. So this is Fowler, Lucille, and then there's Marilyn.
Can I say something? My grandmother, Lucille, met my grandfather, Fowler, in New York City on a blind date. She was trained to be a dental assistant. She grew up in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota. So kind of neat how they met. And this is my aunt, Marilyn. She's 98, she's still alive. She's the one who knows most about this house, because she spent a lot of time here when she was a young girl.
They were reportedly married in Manhattan. What was kind of neat, as I talked about his relationship with Sears, as John mentioned, he was deployed overseas. Sears said, we'll hold your job for you. You go over, serve, your job will be waiting for you. So that was great that he had that. So after he got back from World War I, his service, he actually led Sears through the great post-war World War I, World War II, and the Korea. So he started there, back in the 20s. So and they said they were living in Chicago, and depending on which source, we know that there were Marilyn, Fowler, John, and Judith were the older siblings. Apparently there were a couple that died in infancy, and Jean and an unnamed boy. So, and
Jean was my dad's twin, and she died about 4 months after they were born in 1934. And I didn't know about the other one. The other one was born in between Marilyn and my dad, and I just recently found that out. People didn't talk about deaths like that back then.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the child either until when his cousin, Catherine or Katie, came back. She was one of the daughters of Marilyn, and she said, my mother mentioned that there were 2 babies buried here from the family. And so I started researching to find out, we think that the boy is buried here. Jean apparently is buried in around Chicago, one of the cemeteries out there. So I was not aware that there were other siblings. So the 4 that survived, and so it said there was Marilyn that's here, and then there was Fowler Jr., and then John's father, John, and then Judith was the youngest of the surviving siblings. She is unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. So the family had donated the house to us in 1961. It was actually, the deed was signed in October of 61, and Fowler died unexpectedly in December of 61. So he never got to see the finished museum. June 10th, 1962, we moved from the courthouse over here. That was our official dedication date. So one of the things that I was told when I first started was that the bedroom upstairs, the McConnell bedroom, was left that way because apparently the family had asked us to leave one room similar to the way it was when the family lived here. Well, since they left, apparently they didn't have room for all the furniture. So this was one of Dr. and Mrs. McConnell's bed, marble top dresser, washstand up in the bedroom, as well as there was a bookcase that was here from the house. And then this little black dress that's on display was actually worn by Leafy Fowler, the wife of Isaac, who lived in the house. And I get a lot of comments from people about how tiny she was. And to give you an idea, the waist on the mannequin is only about this big. So everybody's really kind of amazed at that. So this bookcase is full of little trinkets and books and other things that were found in the house from the family. Or we found a lot of books that were marked, Leafy, Beery, Leafy Fowler, Jeff the Powell. So a lot of things that were either here in the house or was given back. So we've got a display case out in the hallway with some of these items on display. In the recreation of Dr. McConnell's home office, we have a lot of Dr. McConnell's original medical book, medical equipment, other things that have been donated by the family over time to kind of help tell their story. So it's not just a few pieces in the parlor, so we've got Beery artifacts. And as John mentioned to me before, there's a lot more that could come back if we have the space. He's like, you want to fill the building up again? So, but yeah, so it was amazing, what the family took out, and the fact that a lot of this stuff, for years, they didn't even know what they had. So we're really appreciative of them, especially John, his brother and cousins, going through these items and being willing to share some of the pieces with us. Now this is a little bit different. I think the picture you had was them standing.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So this, I think, and you may want it described because your cousin had sent you the information.
Well, The picture over here, oh, that is my grandfather. That is John Powell, I believe, and that was my grandfather's hunting dog. The story is they used to run out of town, or walk out of town, and then run and go hunting in the fields out of town with the dog. And they knew which farmers to land they could go on without getting in trouble. So I just found that out recently. So pretty cool.
And what was your grandfather's name?
Fowler.
Fowler.
Yes.
First name?
Fowler Beery.
Fowler.
Fowler
Okay.
Beery McConnell. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
And his brother was Robert Nelson.
Okay.
And it's the Nelson from Lord Nelson of the English admiral.
Oh,
That's
okay.
where that's from.
Okay.
And John Powell was a cousin?
Cousin, yes.
To your grandfather?
Right, yes. And he actually got him the job at Sears,
Oh,
which is another
okay.
interesting thing I just found out.
Okay.
I don't know how he did,
Yeah.
whether he was working for Sears or what.
Yeah, so some of the things that we've discussed, and one of the pictures they talked about, they had a picture, and he's not in this one, but there was Henry that was reportedly a caretaker that would shovel coal for the family. So we're wondering, this may be a coal pile they're sitting on behind the house. And John Powell was the son of Jephthah Powell and Minnie Beery. Jephthah was another Civil War veteran, married her, and they lived in this house. They had two sons, Elkanan, which I think was nicknamed Buck, and then Jephthah Beery, or John Beery Powell, John. So this is a little bit about the house. So this is, one of the older pictures of the way it looks, so you can see the little bump out here. If you get a chance, there's a picture on the wall over there showing the house from that same kind of direction, but it has a solid wall where the fireplace was. And you can see the chimneys straight up above. So this was the original part of the house. This was what we believe the add-on. And here you can see in the overhead view, the original, the addition. This would have been a little summer kitchen. And today we've added the one-room schoolhouse. But back up here across the alley would have been the livery stable. And somewhere here in the center was probably the well on the property. And just some images of the furnishings. So there is the table, the clock we mentioned earlier, the sideboard that was here. So, John didn't know this was going to be
Here
up.
you are. See you there.
So these were
I
pictures
still
of.
had hair, just a little bit.
So these were pictures that were taken about 2017. There is Marilyn, and there is Fowler Jr. standing beside the plaque. He really wanted to stand beside that plaque because he was the one that was here with his mother when the home was dedicated. He helped to unveil that plaque on the front of the house. And then this is John, is that Andrew?
Yeah, it's my brother.
And then
That's
Mike.
Rob, my cousin, and his son. Right
Yeah.
next to him.
They came back, I did a program on the 123rd Regiment of the Ohio Volunteer Infantry, and they made the trip out from Chicago, Wisconsin area to hear the program and to see the house. So we're always proud to have members of the family come back. And you can see, I think this is Olivia, so we're even working on getting the next generation out here and kind of connecting with the family history. So this kind of brings us up to kind of the current, some of the most recent additions. I put this picture in the exhibit out in the hallway and in the slideshow because invariably everybody says, what was that little box at the bottom of the staircase for? Was it to keep the kids from sliding down the banister? And so what was it for people just throwing their keys in the mail? And I said, well, we have a picture from the 1920s that shows this vase sitting in it. And I know it's not my house because I'm sure I would have knocked the thing over going in and out of those doors. But We have the window treatments that are in here, in this room, are based on some of these early photographs, so the reproductions of what would have been here. This is the hallway, kind of as it looks now with the new reception area. Over the winter, we changed out that black and white tile that would never stay clean to a marble look tile, fresh coat of paint, new track lighting, carpeting. So you can see kind of the before and the current. So quite a bit different. And then this is the 3-panel exhibit on about the history of the family, using a lot of the images, some of the ones that are in this slideshow as well as others. So when we sat down to do the history of the house, we decided we wanted to do 3 panels. Initially, we thought about up and down panels, but it just, in talking, we decided to do one, kind of starting with George and Catherine, and just following the timeline up to the present. So this is of the family. Here is the house with copies of deeds and photographs of the way it was set up. And then this panel shows the history of the Wyandot County Historical Society, starting in 1929, the addition of the Beery house in the 60s here, going up to kind of some of the recent times. So this year, part of this reason for this exhibit is we're commemorating the 170th anniversary of the construction of the Beery McConnell home. So thanks to the foresight of the Beery family of building such a strong, sturdy building, the family maintaining it and donating it to us when it was still being lived in and maintained. A lot of historical societies get a building that's been empty for years and have to renovate. So this was well maintained, and so we've taken upon ourselves to try to maintain a high standard of excellence. Occasionally we get support from the McConnell family. You've seen that when you came in, the nice doors out front, those were restored thanks in part to donations from the current McConnell family. So that's kind of a quick nutshell of the history, and I know John has got a few other things that he brought back with him, just through multiple boxes of items that the family has.
I'm not going to be able to talk about that. This is an autograph book that was very common back in the 1800s. I just recently found this in my mom's house, my dad's house. I've never seen it before. There's some pretty amazing stuff in here I want to show you. And I'll put it out here when this is over. You can come and look at it. This is a business card of Dr. McConnell in the mid-1800s. He had a store with how do you pronounce it? Tribal?
Like triple A.
Yeah.
TRIBOLETT. And I was telling John when he first sent me the image of this, like, I've never heard this name associated with Dr. McConnell in any of his business dealings here in town. So that's a really exciting piece that helps us to
This
tell.
is what he sold: drugs, medicines, chemicals, paints, oils, varnishes, dyes, window glass, and putty. So he did a lot of stuff in this town. It's showing its age. So the other image in here that is truly amazing, I can't find it.
Maybe in the portion.
grandfathers buried out at Oak Hill, or,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah, most of the Beery family, if you go out to Oak Hill Cemetery, there is a big circular monument to the Beery family, and each of the sides has an initial carved in of the family member. So there's an IH, and if you go on that side, Isaac's wife and their children are buried. On the other side, you'll see there's an A, so Anthony's children are buried on that side. There is a G for George Beery, and then Robert McConnell and his father, Jake McConnell, and Robert Nelson they're buried in section B out in Oak Hill Cemetery.
And there's a bench that says McConnell on it, a stone bench, which is kind of neat. I know you can't see this, but this is Lincoln's signature.
Wow.
What they did back then, they collected signatures. They cut that out of a letter that he wrote. Now, what's really interesting is this letter was written the day before he was assassinated. Sent to Governor Breaux. So I thought it would be really cool if somebody or some museum has that letter that we could put that back in there. Just amazing stuff. And then the last thing I'm going to show, and everybody's welcome to come up and look at this. When my grandfather retired from Sears in '60, instead of giving him a little watch, they all knew he was a Civil War buff. So they had a professional put together a book here. There's 5 original letters from all the top generals and 2 Lincoln letters in here. And they're all put in here nicely. So this is like a family heirloom to us. And again, I didn't know about this until like 10 years ago. It was just in my uncle's library, just, oh yeah, no big deal. So,
I think what was interesting when you were showing it to me earlier, you said the Lincoln Library had never seen those Lincoln letters.
yes, I took that to the Lincoln Memorial Library in Springfield a few years ago, and they immediately called all the head guys down, and they've never seen these Lincoln letters before. So the letter pertains to he was recommending someone to be a general, which he never was, but they were really interested in, of course they wanted him, but it's, the problem with this is if that ever left the family, that we'd taken apart.
yeah.
And it's just, we don't want that to happen, so it'll stay in the family. So, or some of this stuff eventually probably come here, hopefully. I guess that's about it. I mean, getting pretty warm in here. Thank you for all supporting the museum. Appreciate it.
Are there a couple questions? We'll take about 3 or 4, and then you can come up and chat with us after.
No, when I first came here, John McConnell, Fred's McConnell's son runs Stoke. And I said, you graduated in '50? No, I'm not from here. But John McConnell did.
Yeah, there were 2 separate McConnell lines. The ones that were here left
Right.
in the 1910s, and then there was a separate line that stayed, and they ran like the Stoll Casket works.
Okay, I didn't know that. I just saw John McConnell, and oh, I know who he is. Well, I found out different McConnell.
Yes.
Do you know where they made the bricks for this house?
The story I hear that they actually had a kiln right outside here.
Well, we
In
live
the-
in
in
the
the
yellow
yard.
house behind here. And we heard at one time that they made bricks in our backyard.
Yeah,
We've been in, yeah.
probably, yeah.
I'd forgotten that till today.
Yeah, the story, you know, because it's such rich clay soil here, a lot of the early houses, they just fired the bricks right on the site. So this reportedly 110,000 bricks were used to build the original part of this house. And when you look at it, you'll notice part of the clues that tell us how the age, is you'll see what would have been the exterior walls are about 2 foot thick, whereas the inner walls are just a single course of brick. So that helps us kind of identify, you know, what might have been either load-bearing walls or exterior walls, you know, at one point.
Another interesting thing I've noticed with this house is that, look how large these doors are. They're for giant people. people back then were very small.
Yeah.
You go in a house made in that era, I'm gonna hit my head. So I thought that was kind of neat. I've noticed that over the years coming here. Yeah, they're massive.
12 to 14 foot high ceiling.
Is there a connection to the Fowlers, with Harpster being originally Fowler City? Was that original, is this connected with family?
No, I've never heard anything like that.
Different Fowler?
Yeah, I think it's a separate line of Fowlers. I think Dr. Stephen Fowler was separate from the mercantile Fowlers that it was named after, and then they changed the names, renamed it after David Harpster.
I do know that there's a McConnellsburg in Pennsylvania that was named after the earliest McConnells that came from Scotland in my family. I don't know anything about it. I've never done any research. It's too long. That's too long ago. I don't think there's any records or anything.
Was the house always painted white on the brick, or you got something that happened?
It was originally just regular red brick. And in talking to Marilyn, probably sometime early 1900s, it was painted. And she said she remembered it being like a gray at one point or a yellow. And when we had them scrape down the paint, we found about 6 different paint colors in there. And there was some yellow and 2 shades of gray as well as the white. But it would have originally been brick. And one of the ones, I think the one that was built for Anthony, is still the original brick color. We wanted, when we restored it in 2016, we had thought about when we were going to have all the paint taken off, that we would go back to the original brick. It would be a little shock for people used to this being white for years. But then we learned that sometime in the 70s, to keep the paint on, they mixed mortar in with the paint, so when they put it on the brick, it would not come off unless we sandblasted it. The problem with sandblasting is it makes the brick so soft that it would deteriorate the house.
It's pretty the way it is, leave it, yeah.
But what was nice is when they did, they took the paint off, they took all of the grout out from in between each brick, repainted it, and they painstakingly put the grout back in around, so you can actually, if you look on the porch when you go up, you can see the definition of each individual brick out there. So, but that was the way they would have originally done it, because when the rain comes, it can go in the brick, but as long as the grout is there, the water can seep back out. Before, they had so many layers of paint over it that when the water got in, it couldn't go back out, so it came in through the plaster walls, causing issues that we had to correct. I want to thank you all. This was a tremendous audience.
Thanks for coming.